Hello and welcome to another edition of GNAT-TV's In-Depth series. I'm Andrew McKeever, the news director here at GNAT-TV's News Project, and it's a pleasure to have you with us today. Today is Thursday, January 3rd, and so Happy New Year, first of all. And this is our first in-depth show of the year, and very appropriate that we have with us today in the studio the two state senators from Bennington County, Richard Sears and Brian Campion. Gentlemen, thank you both for being here today.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, and Happy New Year to you.
All right, I appreciate you making the time available as we're on the threshold of another session up at the legislature. In a few days, you'll be traveling up to Montpelier to start off the new legislative biennium. And a lot of things on the agenda as always. Dick Sears has been a state senator from Bennington County since 1993, and he serves as the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee and also serves on the Senate Appropriations Committee. Brian Campion is the vice chair of the Natural Resources and Energy Committee and also serves on the Senate Finance Committee. Before that, he served 2 terms as a state representative from Bennington. Again, gentlemen, great to have you with us today.
Nice to be here.
A lot to talk about. But let's start off with a couple of issues that were kind of holdovers, I guess you could say, from last year. Those being the minimum wage bill and the family leave bill, and also the tax and regulate question that kind of was in play there towards the end of last year's session. Do you see those issues, those 3 issues, kind of being at the top of the list of things that will be discussed up at the legislature as we begin?
I expect that at least the tax and regulate be the first bill that comes out of the Senate Judiciary Committee this year. I'm introducing, along with 4 or 5 other senators, the bill that would create a tax and regulated system based partly upon S-241, which passed the Senate 3 or 4 times in the last few years, and based on the Governor's Commission's findings. We intend to put a bill together that sends whatever revenue is generated from a tax and regulated system to the general fund and not specifically allocate to either the Department of Public Safety or other agencies the revenue. We would generate fees to support the work of a cannabis commission, which would be in charge, very similar to Massachusetts model. And our tax rate would be the same as the rooms and meals tax in Vermont, 11%, with the ability to have a local option of 1%. So our tax would be much lower than that envisioned by the commission.
So, I mean, as many people will remember, last year the state house, the legislature, did pass a legalization of marijuana possession bill, allowing you to possess up to an ounce or so, but no provision whatsoever for being able to buy it legally within the state. A tax and regulate system would in theory, I guess, enable the state to obtain revenue.
Well, but
from
also would provide for quality product that's been tested and has been regulated. And that's one of the problems, is that you don't know what you're. I don't buy it on the open market, and I don't use it. But the problem that I've heard is that you don't know what you're buying. You're buying it from people under the counter. Pretty soon, people from here will be able to go down to Williamstown, Mass. To a store where they'll be able to purchase it legally. And that's a concern for all of us, that that's not money that's going into Vermont's tax coffers, it's going into Massachusetts.
Right.
I think, Dick, I don't know if I think you would agree. I think for the most part we've heard positive things from our constituents around this issue.
Okay.
I think absolutely the quality and the safety control piece is key. Things are laced with different kinds of drugs. We know of the opiate situation in this state and throughout the country. So I think tax and regulate is the right way to go. And again, I think Dick also has received a lot of positive feedback from constituents. Certainly people are concerned around traffic safety, those kinds of things, but those are the things I would think that the commission will dig into.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, well, that was the governor's main concern, at least. Do you think...
well, I mean, it's if the RAND report is anywhere near correct, 80,000 Vermonters are currently using marijuana. Right. That means the problem's here now. It's not something that's just going to be created because we have a tax and regulate system. So that kind of to me, those kinds of things are roadblocks that frequently advocacy groups and those who are opposed to a particular proposal throw up to try to kind of stop it or look at it. And frankly, if it may create a little more of a problem, but I think there are solutions to those problems.
So what about those other two issues then, the minimum wage and family leave? They passed through the legislature. The governor vetoed both of them. That's where it ended last year. Do you think that there's a different dynamic in play this year that would allow the governor a path to?
It remains to be seen what will happen in the House. I think the Senate was pretty overwhelmingly in favor of both proposals. I do have concerns about the paid family leave and the funding for it. It's coming out of the employee's own pocket, and will all those who are paying into it be able to take advantage of it? And also, is that the right way to do it? The minimum wage, I personally don't have a problem with an increase over a gradual period of time, but I did have some questions about the paid family leave.
Yeah, the minimum wage, someone said, I remember on the Senate floor, that if this had been tied to inflation, it'd be up to somewhere around $22 or $24 an hour. So we all know there's huge economic inequities right now in this country, and the folks that would be benefiting from a $15 minimum wage are at the very bottom. So I voted for it, and I know Dick voted for it. It was overwhelming in the Senate, and I intend to support it again. I think Dick's concerns are right around the paid family leave. It's always a question, what can we do and what should we be doing for people? One of the things that I continue to be conflicted with is, how we have so many people still struggling with health insurance. And access is one thing. We might have improved the amount of access, but we still have a lot of people who have high deductibles and, high copays and those kinds of things. And, if I had my wish, I would probably be putting more effort into healthcare issues than perhaps paid family leave. It really continues to be, the debt that people accumulate, and just the lack of being able to go to a doctor comfortably when you're really sick is a big issue.
Mm-hmm. Well, we'll certainly be watching that closely to see where it goes, and of course it'll be interesting to see if the governor decides to veto them again. And of course we have a somewhat different political dynamic now in play this year, particularly over in the House, where your party, the Democrats, have a veto-proof majority, I guess, assuming the independents and the progressive.
I think it might be veto-proof on some issues, but not on others. And there's always a dynamic. It depends on the issue. And even though in theory, there are enough votes, you never count on every person being able to support every proposal. Yeah. And there are a certain group in the House, used to be known as the Blue Dog Democrats, and they can control a lot on a veto vote, whether or not they would support a veto or not, based upon what they might get in return. And that was true of the Senate back in the day when it was a closer. Right now it's 24-6, so there isn't that dynamic as much. But there's still some moderate voices in the Senate who would be able to join with others in either sustaining or overriding a veto of the governor, depending upon what that was. So there are no guarantees.
Right.
I'm thinking I know Democrats that voted against minimum wage in the House, and I suspect those folks will also return and vote against minimum wage. So, yeah, and I think it's true with the tax and regulate in terms of an override in the House. I think it's going to be a lot of work.
Cleanup of the state's waters that the federal EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, has been kind of harping on the state to kind of get going on to do some cleanup of the state's waters. That is a huge bill, at least as I understand it, a lot of money. We have a very expensive proposition, and I guess one of the hang-ups has been the funding source from the state. Any sense as to where those dollars are going to come from, or?
Yeah, well, I think a couple of things. Senator Sears mentioned, before the cameras started rolling, that these are all of the waters of the state. That it is just not Lake Champlain, but it's all the waters around here. I think my committee, Natural Resource and Energy, and I think this would be true of Senate Finance, and a lot of our colleagues are looking to make sure that the polluters are paying. That, you know, there are people out there that are polluting the lakes, and we have to look at everyone and make sure that those folks are really pulled in. I know the governor has put forward the idea of an estate tax going for this. I don't see that might work in terms of raising some of the dollars, but I think, you know, it's a heavier lift than that, and we are going to have to look at, you know, who around, whether it's transportation folks, industry, agricultural community that is doing the polluting, that they pay their share. And that's going to be complicated, and it's going to be hard. But as you said, the EPA is mandating this, and we're not making progress. I mean, the people have talked about the cleanup, so let's just take Lake Champlain for a minute. We're talking about cleaning up Lake Champlain for a long time, and we still see algae blooms. We still have major problems with beach closing. So we have a lot of work to do, and it's going to take funding, and it's something that I think we're all going to be grappling with this year in terms of what the appropriate funding is. While we're on the waterfront, I do want to mention just a couple of other things. As you know, and I'll let Dick talk about S-197, but S-103 came out of what happened in Bennington with PFOA contamination. And what S-103 did, which the governor vetoed, was trying to put more protections around products that young people might be exposed to. It started a working group to look deeper into harmful chemicals. And I would plan on seeing, I know that I and others, Senator Sears also will be reintroducing that bill. And hopefully the governor will sign it this time, or perhaps there'll be enough votes to do an override. The other clean water issue that we're looking at throughout the state, as you may have heard, is lead in drinking water in schools. And that's a serious issue. You know, the American Academy of Pediatrics has come out to say, you know, there's no good amount of lead in water that children should be drinking. So we're looking at a bill right now that I and others, Dick too, are co-sponsoring and trying to move through this legislative session to really address this issue, to not only require that testing happen, but also the mitigation of those problems. So clean water continues to be an issue, and one that I feel that we're grappling with, but we're working hard on also, grappling mostly with the funding piece. Do you want to add something about S-197?
Well, I did, yeah. The S-197 is a bill that we passed out of the Senate that Senator Campion and I sponsored directly as a result of the PFOA situation in Bennington, North Bennington. And the whole theory behind it is somebody's going to pay when there's pollution. And should it be the homeowner whose property has been ruined, whose drinking wells have been contaminated? Should it be the taxpayer through the town or the state government or even the federal government? Or should it be the polluter? And so S-197 went right to the heart of that and required the polluter to pay as it passed the Senate. When it left the House and went to the governor before he vetoed it, it was merely on medical monitoring to make sure that somebody who, you know, you're polluted, your well is polluted, and you've been drinking PFOA water, and it's likely to cause certain types of cancers. We can test for that and hopefully catch it before it becomes serious enough to either kill you or have serious operations needed. And it was disappointing that the governor actually vetoed that. I mean, it's just common sense that you're the victim. And where else do we require the victim to pay? I mean, it's sort of like saying you're a victim of a crime, but you're going to pay for the damage to your vehicle, even though somebody stole it and wrecked it. So I think that was common sense to me, and we were very surprised that the governor vetoed it in opposition that rose about it. But, you know, chemical industries and other businesses have strong lobbies in Montpelier, just as they do on the national level, and they fight these types of things.
Given all the agita that went into the gun control measure this past year, do you think that that's an idea that a lot of your colleagues will be supportive of, having just gone so far, that we now want to revisit that again and come up with an additional provision, even though there may be some grounds for saying that's not a bad idea?
You know, if we just stuck to a waiting period I might be open-minded to it. But Senator Baruth's been known to add a lot of things to bills, as has the House Judiciary Committee. And I'm really concerned about what got added last year to a waiting period bill. And Vermont's problem with firearms is suicide, frankly. 90% of the violent gun-related deaths in Vermont are suicide. The remainder are basically domestic violence related. So if we tackle those two problems, which we did last year in two different bills, one which I sponsored, which was so-called red flag law, which allows somebody to, the court to take away firearms for a period of time from those who are deemed to be a danger to themselves or others. And we were one of the few states that was actually able to pass that law, and we passed it with 0 no votes. Roll call in the House and the Senate, it's unheard of, a gun control bill in Vermont with no votes against. If we can do the same thing with a bill like this, that, we'll talk about it in Senate Judiciary. I'm committed to taking up a waiting period, but I don't know how I would vote on it right now. But when you add all these other things like they did with the magazines, that's questionable, to me, unenforceable, frankly, the magazine bill that they passed last year. So, that's why I voted against it. And, it's funny. I got a lot of criticism for voting against it, but I was in Hannaford's New Year's Day picking up something that we forgot to buy. And a gentleman came up to me and said, who was waiting in line behind me, and I was having trouble with the automatic teller, or automatic thing. He said, I just want to thank you for voting against that bill. I thought I was holding the guy up, and he actually thanked me. Yeah. So, it's a mixed bag amongst our constituents, and it'll continue to be a very contentious, very difficult issue. But again, if I can look at what are Vermont's problems and how do we deal with those two problems, domestic violence, gun-related deaths, as well as suicide and gun-related deaths. And it makes sense to me to try to take steps to prevent those two.
Yeah, I always appreciate Dick's very practical way of looking at things and addressing these issues. And I don't know whether or not I'll support Phil Baruth's bills. I did last year, supported the sweep of bills. It is interesting to see what I think we would all agree has been a bit of a shift in the culture over the past 5 or 6 years. With the Senate, looking at the group of people, I think Dick would agree that the group of people in the Senate are probably open to, additional gun legislation, different firearm reforms, but we still have a ways to go, and introducing a bill is one thing, but letting a committee look at it carefully, and then what comes out of that committee, it can be an entirely different. So yeah, we'll have to wait and see. All
right. Well, another issue, of course, that just seems to be always on the agenda is education questions, and of course, Act 46 has sort of wound its way to some sort of conclusion, I guess, although we have a lawsuit or two, I guess, underway by some towns who were a little unhappy about how the State Board of Education wound up resolving some of the last consolidation of school district issues. And I know down here in Bennington County, we have a situation with Arlington and the Battenkill Valley Supervisory Union, and now the Southwestern Vermont Supervisory Union, where they are now going to be part of the SVSU. Are we finished with all of this, do you think, or is there more to come?
By finished, do you mean is the legislature going to propose additional things?
Is there going to be any follow-up, or is Act 46 pretty much a finished product and we're not going to reopen how we're going to?
That's a great question. I think one of my concerns, I think our concerns is, at least down here, there was a lack of opportunity to really weigh in on these issues. But I don't know if the legislature has an appetite to reopen Act 46 and start again in any way. But the problems that certainly in this area are serious problems, and I think this area is an anomaly. I think throughout the state you can find pockets where it's a serious problem. So, we'll see what the Senate Education Committee does. I've for a long time been concerned about the role of the State Board of Education. little bit of a reputation for having tried to dissolve it when I was in the House. And it's, you know, an unelected body of people making these kinds of decisions has always concerned me. And I think in the end, would it have been more appropriate for something like this to go back to the legislature? I'm not 100% sure the legislature was the best group to deal with it, given all the politics, and it probably never would have been resolved. But I do continue to have an issue with you know, an unelected body. We don't have this in transportation, in healthcare. You know, basically the governor, he or she has their say and can run on issues of education or run on issues of transportation, healthcare, firearm regulations, all sorts of things. But education is different.
I don't know how it'll get resolved. The vote in the Senate for Act 46 was 27-3.
That sounds decisive.
Yeah, it was fairly decisive. One of the 3 votes was me against it. And because of the centralization, that's what bothers me, as well as I agree with Brian, the state board, and I agree with the governor on this one. The state board should not be making the decision. They can make recommendations, perhaps to the governor, that this would be the thing to do, or even the legislature. But with very little notice to the towns of Arlington, Sunderland, and Sandgate, as well as to the Southwest Vermont Supervisory Union, they just said, you're going to merge.
Right.
I mean, that took everybody by surprise. I understood the merger of the Southwest Vermont Supervisory Union. I understood the mergers up here in the Manchester region. But that one was done with little discussion. The superintendents weren't even given the opportunity, nor were the school boards, to really have input in it. This, to me, is centralization, and I think Vermonters, by and large, will always fight that kind of centralization of the power. And that, you know, I have a great deal of respect for John O'Keefe and Oliver Olson, who Oliver is the one who made the motion. I understand that. I've served with Oliver, but you know, it would have been nice to give the Southwest Vermont Supervisory Union, give the Battenkill Supervisory Union the opportunity to come and talk to the board, make their case, for the voters of this area to be able to make their case. I just think that's wrong. I find that to be outrageous, quite frankly, and it angers me. So I think that the suit, may actually have some merit, and we'll see what the courts do with it. But I don't know if there'll be the appetite in the legislature to deal with it. But when you see what happened here, and I know what happened in some other areas, that bothers me.
Even though the Act 46 passed when in 2015,
Yeah.
3+ years now, I would have thought that would have been a lot of time, and that seemed to be the stance of the State Board of Education and the Education Secretary, that, hey, you guys have had 3 years to figure this out or think about it or discuss alternatives.
I guess there was always the assumption that Arlington would end up in the Battenkill would end up with the Bennington-Rutland Supervisory Union, and instead it went south. And I think that was what took people by surprise. It may be something that works very well. I don't know. But at least giving the voters of this region the opportunity to weigh in on it seems to me to be forthcoming. The vote in the southern part of the county was, fairly unanimous or not unanimous, but very widespread support in Bennington and Shaftesbury, and very close in Woodford and Pownell.
Right.
So that wasn't a big surprise that happened.
Yeah. State colleges around Vermont seem to be having some financial struggles, I guess, coupled with fewer students going to them, enrollment questions. Do you think that the state colleges will be coming to you folks to say, hey, we need a little support here, or will you be able to say, well, you've got to make do with what you got?
I'll let Dick do the appropriation piece, but I just wanted to also mention, I think higher ed across the country is going through some real changes. Teaching at Bennington College independent, private colleges, liberal arts colleges in the United States are going through some real changes. I mean, the whole dynamic has greatly shifted since I was in college, where people, most people that were going to go away, they went away to a four-year institution, but there are all sorts of different options now. Some students are going abroad, some taking gap years, some students, because of the cost, are going to a community college for 2 years and then transferring. So all sorts of things, I think, are happening, and and our state colleges certainly aren't immune from that. I think the other dynamic that's really impacting our state colleges is what's happening in New York around, a move toward free tuition. And so if our state colleges were pulling from anywhere, along that New York border, that that's going to significantly decrease, I think, over the years. I think it's important for the state colleges to really seriously look at issues of perhaps consolidating in some way. I mean, could you have a chancellor or a president for all of them and have each of the institutions doing different things? I don't know. I mean, the other question is, if you look at, are all these economic issues and finance issues, or are they where are finances being spent? Listen, I think sports programs are great, without a doubt, and I think there's a pull to certain colleges and universities for it. But the question has to be asked sometimes: what is higher education? Is it there to go and play a sport? Is it to go and get an education? And so, is it always the amount appropriated, or how the dollars are being spent? And I think those are serious questions that have to be asked right now, in higher education. Again, I don't think our state colleges are immune from having those serious conversations if they want to continue to exist.
Interesting.
I think coupled with that, and I totally agree with Brian on all of what he said, coupled with that, years ago, a formula was created whereby the state colleges, UVM, and the Vermont Student Assistance Corporation all agreed that rather than they would ask for a certain amount percentage amount from the legislature of an increase each year. So that formula, unfortunately, in my view, even though I'm a UVM graduate, resulted in UVM getting about double what the state colleges and VSAC get. So to get an increase that VSAC is asking for, you cannot use that formula. And what I would probably propose is that you reduce UVM's allocation, giving that money to the state colleges. The thing about UVM is that they use that money for scholarships for Vermonters, and that's great. But many first-generation students, college students, end up in the state college system or some of the other colleges in the state or out of state. And they use either VSAC or state college funding. And I think that's really where the future is. And I think the other thing is that the state colleges are more attuned, either with the community college or the state colleges themselves, through finding those jobs or the education that we have jobs lacking in the state. We're not. You talk to business owners employers. They have jobs, but they can't fill those jobs because they don't have the talented people to do those jobs. And so, I think that could be something that the state colleges and particularly VSAC could enter into working on. And then at that point, I'd be happy to talk to them about increases. But it needs to be looking at, what are the jobs here in Bennington County that they can't find a suitable employee for.
Boy, that is a whole other subject of conversation.
But I think it's critical that the legislature look forward rather than just saying, okay, here's another $25 million for state colleges. That doesn't solve that problem.
Right.
And the college debt piece, of course, is huge. I mean, kids graduate with debilitating debt, and we don't want to see that happen.
But if Vermont Technical College, for example, could train people in some of the skills that are needed. For the jobs here in Bennington County, whether it be Orvis or Mac Molding or
I hear GNAT's looking for a new host.
Well, wow, there's so many other things here that we didn't have a chance to get to, but
have us back.
I think, this would be
I'd be happy to come back in a month or so.
Maybe in a little bit, or maybe during town meeting break or something like that. But a lot of things I'm sure will be bubbling up to make this an extremely interesting session for you both and all of your colleagues up there in the State House.
Yeah.
I would be happy to come back and talk with you.
All right. Well,
Later on.
we'll hold you to that
Yeah.
then.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you,
Appreciate
Andrew.
it.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
I want to thank both Senators Dick Sears and Brian Campion for being with us today, and also for you for joining in. I hope you found it an interesting and informative show. We'll see you again the next time, and have a great day.